The Exelveran Empire had ruled the stars for centuries. Their warriors were feared, their fleets unmatched, and their queen, Vel-Zur, was known as a conqueror who had never tasted defeat. She had heard whispers of human warriors before, but to her, they were just that, whispers, myths, nothing more than exaggerated alien stories. Now she stood on the battlefield of Veldis III, a newly conquered planet. The local resistance had crumbled, their forces broken. And yet, something felt wrong. The reports spoke of a single enemy still fighting, a lone warrior, moving through the ruins like a ghost, taking down her soldiers one by one. A human. Vel-Zur scoffed as she listened to the latest report. Ridiculous. There are no humans left in this galaxy. Her officers hesitated. My queen, our best troops have engaged him, and none have returned. She narrowed her glowing violet eyes. This was no longer a matter of strategy. It was a matter of pride. Take me to him, she ordered. Vel-Zur's personal guards led her through the ruins of the fallen city. Fires burned in the distance, and the metallic scent of war hung in the air. It should have been silent. But instead, she heard the echoes of battle, the sound of someone still fighting. They reached a large broken plaza. In the center, surrounded by the bodies of Selveran soldiers, stood a single figure. A human. Vel-Zur's heart stopped for just a moment. He wasn't a legend. He was real. He stood tall, dressed in scared battle armor, his face partially hidden by a cracked helmet. His stance was relaxed, but his eyes burned with something fierce. Determination. His weapon, a modified plasma rifle, hummed softly in his hands. He was outnumbered, yet he wasn't afraid. For the first time in her life, Vel-Zur hesitated. The human looked at her and smirked. So, you're the queen. His voice was rough, laced with exhaustion, but not fear. Vel-Zur's jaw tightened. I am Queen Vel-Zur of the Selveran Empire. You are nothing but a relic of a dead race. The human chuckled. Funny. That's what the last guy said before I took his sword. She clenched her fists. Arrogance. Defiance. This was a human. Her guards moved forward, weapons raised. The human lifted his rifle. You sure about that? Vel-Zur could feel it. The tension, the raw energy of battle hanging in the air. This was no ordinary fighter. Perhaps the legends were true after all. And for the first time in her reign, Queen Vel-Zur wasn't certain she would win. The air between them was heavy with tension. Queen Vel-Zur, ruler of the Selveran Empire, stood face to face with a human, a species she believed to be extinct. Her golden armor shimmered under the burning sky. Her violet eyes locked onto the warrior before her. He was alone, surrounded by her best soldiers. Yet he stood calm, as if he had already fought battles worse than this. You have a name, human? Vel-Zur asked, her voice sharp. The man smirked. Dane Carter. A simple name. Nothing royal. Nothing legendary. And yet, he had already defeated dozens of her finest warriors. Vel-Zur's pride would not allow this to continue. Kill him, she commanded. Her guards moved instantly. Blades flashed. Energy rifles hummed. And within seconds, the battle began. Dane did not hesitate. He moved like a predator. Fast, precise, ruthless. The first guard lunged. Dane ducked, grabbing the alien's arm and twisting it until bones snapped. The second swung a plasma sword at his head. He sidestepped, dodging the glowing blade by inches before driving his elbow into the soldier's throat. Another guard aimed a rifle. Dane spun, grabbed a fallen plasma sword, and threw it like a spear. It pierced straight through the soldier's chest, pinning him to a ruined wall. The battlefield fell silent. The last three guards hesitated. Dane wiped a streak of blood from his cheek and smirked. Come on. That can't be all you've got. Vel-Zur's eyes widened. No alien moved like this. No soldier fought with such deadly precision. This was not just a warrior. This was something else. The remaining guards rushed him together. Dane ducked under one, grabbed another by the wrist, and used his own momentum to flip him over, slamming him into the ground. He turned, dodging a plasma bolt, then fired his own stolen rifle. One shot, one kill. Now, only one guard remained. He hesitated, looking at his fallen comrades. Dane raised his rifle. Run. The soldier dropped his weapon and fled. The battle was over, and Dane was still standing. Val-Zur felt something she hadn't felt in years. Doubt. This human wasn't just a survivor. He was a legend in the flesh. Dane looked at her, his gaze unwavering. So, Queen, do you still think humans are just myths? Val-Zur's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't over. Not yet. If she wanted to prove the superiority of her empire, there was only one way left. She would fight him herself. A heavy silence settled over the battlefield. The HFY warriors lay defeated, their bodies sprawled across the ruined ground. Smoke and dust filled the air, but the real storm was in Queen Val-Zur's eyes. This human, Dane Carter, had done the impossible. Her guards, the finest warriors of her empire, were either dead or had fled. One man, one human, and he was still standing. Val-Zur felt rage burn in her veins. This was an insult to her rule, to her empire, to everything she had built. Dane wiped the sweat from his brow and looked at her with calm defiance. Still think humans are just legends, Your Majesty. That was it. She had heard enough. Val-Zur removed her royal cape, letting it drop onto the dust-covered ground. Then she reached for her plasma blade, the weapon of the HFY royal family. Its purple energy ignited, humming like a hungry beast. "You dare challenge me?" she asked, her voice cold. Dane chuckled. "I didn't challenge you, Queen. You just can't accept losing." Her grip on the sword tightened. "Enough talk. Fight me, human." Dane let out a breath, rolling his shoulders. "Fine by me." He raised his stolen plasma sword, its blue energy crackling in his grip. And then, she struck first. Val-Zur lunged forward, her movements faster than any of her soldiers. Dane barely dodged in time, the blade slicing through the air just inches from his chest. Sparks flew as her attack carved through a broken pillar behind him. She was fast, faster than he expected. But Dane had fought fast enemies before, and he knew speed wasn't everything. She attacked again, her strikes coming in a furious flurry of slashes and thrusts. Dane blocked, dodged, countered, each movement sharp and precise. The sound of clashing plasma echoed across the battlefield. Then, Dane saw an opening. He stepped inside her guard and elbowed her in the ribs. Val-Zur staggered back, eyes wide. No one had ever touched her in battle before. Dane didn't give her time to recover. He swung his blade toward her shoulder. She barely blocked it, the impact sending a shockwave through her arms. He's strong. Too strong. For the first time in her life, Queen Val-Zur was struggling. She gritted her teeth. No, she would not lose. She leaped back, creating distance. Dane smirked. "Getting tired, Queen." Her eyes blazed with fury. "I will not be humiliated by a human." She charged again, this time with a new strategy. This fight was far from over. Val-Zur's plasma blade crackled as she lunged forward, her speed unmatched. She was a queen, a warrior, a conqueror who had never known defeat. But Dane Carter was ready. The moment she struck, he sidestepped, her blade slicing past him. He countered instantly. His own plasma sword clashed against hers, sending a burst of energy through the battlefield. Sparks flew as the force of their strikes shook the ground beneath them. Val-Zur snarled, "You fight well for a relic." Dane smirked, "You talk a lot for someone losing." Her fury exploded. She unleashed a relentless assault, her blade flashing in rapid arcs. Dane dodged, barely keeping up. But Val-Zur wasn't just fast. She was smart. She feinted left, making Dane shift his stance, then slammed her knee into his stomach. The impact knocked the air from his lungs. Dane stumbled back, coughing. Before he could recover, Valzer swept his legs from under him, sending him crashing to the ground. The queen stood over him, her plasma sword glowing like a burning star. "This ends now, human." She thrust her blade down, but Dane rolled away at the last second. The sword slammed into the ground where he had been, the force leaving a deep scorch mark. Valzer growled in frustration. Dane jumped to his feet, breathing hard but still grinning. He wasn't afraid. She clenched her fists. "Why do you keep getting up?" Dane wiped blood from his lip. "Because I'm human, and humans don't break easy." Something inside Valzer hesitated. His words carried weight, something deeper than arrogance. She had conquered hundreds of species. They all feared her. They all submitted when faced with her power. But this man, he refused to kneel. Her grip on her sword tightened. "Then I will break you myself." Before she could attack again, a voice echoed across the battlefield. "My queen, we have him surrounded." Valzer turned. Her reinforcements had arrived. Hundreds of Excelveran soldiers stood in formation, their weapons aimed at Dane. Dane exhaled sharply. "Great. More of you." Valzer felt a strange disappointment. She had wanted to defeat him herself, but now her army would end this fight instead. "Drop your weapon, human," she commanded. "You have lost." Dane glanced at the soldiers, then at her, and he laughed. "You think this is over?" he said, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Lady, you haven't seen anything yet." Valzer narrowed her eyes. What was he planning? Then she realized. Dane wasn't planning to surrender. He was planning to fight. Even against impossible odds, the human refused to give up. Ain Carter stood alone, surrounded by hundreds of Excelveran soldiers. Plasma rifles hummed, locked onto him, ready to fire. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and exhausted. Yet, he still smirked. Queen Valzer stared at him, her grip on her sword tightening. This human had defied her, humiliated her warriors, and survived a fight against her. And still, he stood unshaken. "Surrender, human," she commanded. "This is over." Dane tilted his head, eyes glancing at the soldiers. "Yeah. Then why do I feel like you're the one in trouble?" Before she could reply, a new voice echoed across the ruins. "Apologies, my queen, but we cannot allow this to continue." Valzer's eyes narrowed as Lord Caldris, one of her highest-ranking generals, stepped forward. More soldiers appeared, but their weapons were not aimed at Dane. They were aimed at her. Her blood ran cold. "What is the meaning of this?" she growled. Caldris smirked, his silver armor gleaming in the firelight. "You have failed us, queen. You let a human humiliate you. The Empire deserves better leadership." Valzer's mind raced. A coup. She should have seen this coming. The soldiers shifted, their loyalty clear. Dane watched the scene, arms crossed. "Wow. Looks like I'm not the only one they want dead." Valzer glared at him. "Stay out of this, human." Caldris chuckled. "You should listen to him, my queen. You are no longer in command." Valzer's jaw tightened. She had ruled for decades. She had built this empire. And now, these traitors thought they could take it from her. Not while she still breathed. She raised her sword. Caldris sighed. "So stubborn. Kill her." Blasters fired. Valzer dodged, her plasma blade deflecting shots, but there were too many. She was fast. She was strong. But even she couldn't fight an army alone. Then, a plasma bolt shot through Caldris' shoulder. The traitorous general stumbled back, shouting in pain. Everyone froze. Valzer turned. Dane Carter had just saved her. His stolen rifle smoked, aimed directly at her enemies. She stared at him, stunned. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Dane shrugged. "Kinda hate when people gang up on someone. even if that someone is a royal pain in my ass. Velzer blinked. This human was insane. But right now, she needed him. Fine, she growled. Fight with me, human. Dane grinned. Now we're talking. And together, the human and the queen turned to face the empire that had betrayed them. The battlefield had changed. A moment ago, Queen Velzer had been the ruler of an empire. Now she was its target. Dane Carter stood beside her, a human warrior who should have been her enemy. Yet he had just saved her life. The traitor general, Keldris, clutched his wounded shoulder, snarling. Kill them both. Xelvaran soldiers raised their weapons. Dane smirked. All right, Queen, you ready for this? Velzer exhaled sharply. Stay out of my way, human. The battle began. Plasma bolts lit up the sky as the soldiers opened fire. Velzer moved like a storm, her plasma sword slicing through the air, cutting down enemies with deadly precision. Dane was just as brutal. His stolen rifle sent perfect, calculated shots, each blast finding its mark. He dodged, rolled, and used the ruins for cover, taking out enemies one by one. Despite their differences, they fought in sync. Velzer blocked an incoming strike, twisting to deflect another attack. Behind her, Dane fired over her shoulder, taking out an enemy she hadn't seen. For the first time, she realized something. Dane wasn't just strong. He was skilled. He fought not like a reckless brute, but like a soldier who had survived impossible odds before. And more than that, he was helping her. Why? She had conquered countless warriors. No one had ever fought beside her. Not like this. Keldris watched the battle unfold, his eyes narrowing. Enough. Bring in the heavy weapons. Dane saw it first. A squad of armored mechs stomped onto the battlefield, their plasma cannons glowing with deadly energy. Velzer's heart sank. Even she couldn't fight those alone. Dane sighed. Big guns, huh? All right. Queen, cover me. She blinked. What? Dane took off running. Velzer hesitated for half a second. Then she followed him. Dane dove behind a wrecked Xelvaran transport. He tore open a panel, his fingers moving with expert precision. Velzer landed beside him. What are you doing? Dane grinned, stealing their cannons. Before she could question him, the ground shook. The mechs fired. Boom! The transport exploded, flames erupting into the sky. But the mechs stopped moving. Velzer stared. They had shut down. Dane dusted off his hands, took control of their power cores. Fun trick, huh? Velzer was speechless. He had just turned the enemy's weapons against them. Keldris stepped back, realizing the tide had turned. Velzer smiled for the first time. You are full of surprises, human. Dane reloaded his rifle. You have no idea. The traitors panicked. The queen and the human were winning. But the battle was not over yet. The battlefield was a chaos of fire, smoke, and flashing lights. Queen Velzer and Dane Carter stood side by side, the only two standing against the full might of the Xelvaran Empire's traitors. Around them, the once proud soldiers of the Empire were either fleeing or being cut down by their own weapons. Keldris and his loyalists were backed into a corner. Their mechs were now disabled, their firepower rendered useless by Dane's unexpected hack. Velzer's violet eyes scanned the scene. She should have been in control, but now, for the first time in her life, she wasn't the one calling the shots. Where is Keldris? She growled, looking around. Dane surveyed the battlefield, his rifle still ready in his hands. I think he's hiding. Suddenly, a loud voice echoed across the ruins. Enough. This ends now. Keldris emerged from the shadows, his armor clattering as he moved. A dozen of his elite soldiers flanked him, their weapons drawn. But this time, Keldris wasn't just going to rely on brute force. He was going to challenge Velzer for her throne, in the most ancient and sacred tradition of the Xelvaran Empire. You are unfit to rule, Velzer, Keldris sneered. Asterisk, asterisk, your weakness has brought us to this. I challenge you, in single combat. The ground beneath their feet rumbled, and all eyes turned toward the dueling circle that had been drawn out in the dirt. Val-Zur's eyes narrowed. This was it. The challenge for the throne was a sacred trial in the Empire, and only one could emerge victorious. She had never lost a battle before, but the stakes were higher than ever. Dane took a step forward, looking between the Queen and the traitorous general. You don't need to do this, Val-Zur. Val-Zur glanced at him, the hint of respect in her gaze. It is tradition. Dane looked at her sharply. Don't let him manipulate you. She clenched her fists, angered by his words. He was right. She was the Queen, and no one, not even Caldris, should have the power to challenge her. I will do what must be done. The two warriors, Val-Zur and Caldris, faced off in the center of the circle. Caldris swung his plasma blade in a wide arc, a grin on his face. This will be the last time you sit on your throne, Val-Zur. Val-Zur stepped back, using her speed and agility to avoid his strikes. You've always underestimated me, Caldris. She countered his next strike with a vicious riposte, sending him stumbling back. But Caldris recovered quickly, his experience showing as he launched another attack. For a moment, the battle felt like it would be neck and neck, with neither fighter gaining the upper hand. But Caldris had a dark advantage. He was a traitor willing to do anything to win. Dane watched, waiting for the right moment. You can't win by playing fair, he muttered to himself. Suddenly, it clicked. The battle raged on. Two warriors locked in a deadly dance, their plasma blades flashing in the dim light. Queen Val-Zur was fierce, moving with precision and grace, but Caldris was relentless, using his strength and anger to fuel his every strike. The duel between them was more than just a fight. It was the future of the entire empire, and each swing of their weapons carried the weight of their people's fate. Val-Zur's blade clashed with Caldris's, sparks flying as the force of their strikes sent shockwaves through the battlefield. She had always been the strongest, the most feared. Yet, for the first time, she felt vulnerable. Her muscles burned with exhaustion, and her focus began to slip. Caldris could see it. You're tired, my queen, he sneered. You're weak. You've let this human distract you. Val-Zur's eyes narrowed. She was not weak. She had fought for this empire, shed blood for it, and she would not lose it now. With a roar, she launched herself at Caldris, her plasma blade slashing through the air, aiming for his chest. But he blocked, his grin widening. Is that all you've got? He mocked. Dane Carter watched from the sidelines, his heart pounding. He knew that the Queen's strength was unmatched, but even the greatest warriors had their limits. He had seen it too many times. The weariness, the exhaustion that came with battle. The traitor general had tricked her. He had played on her pride, made her fight alone. And now he was starting to win. Dane couldn't let that happen. Without thinking, he sprinted toward the dueling circle, ignoring the shots being fired around him. Hey, Caldris, he shouted, aiming his rifle at the traitor. Caldris turned just in time to see Dane's shot. The plasma bolt hit him square in the shoulder, sending him stumbling backward. For a brief moment, the traitor was off balance, and in that moment, Val-Zur took her chance. With a powerful swing of her blade, she disarmed Caldris, knocking his plasma sword from his hands. He fell to the ground, a roar of rage escaping his lips. Val-Zur stood over him, her sword poised above his head. She didn't need to say a word. Her eyes said it all. He had lost. Finish it, Dane said quietly from behind her. Do what needs to be done. For a long moment, Val-Zur stood still, looking down at the traitor who had once been her most trusted general. The rage in her eyes began to fade, replaced by something else. Sadness. No, she finally said, stepping back. He doesn't deserve the honor of dying by my hand. Instead, she turned to her soldiers, still loyal and still standing, and raised her plasma sword high. Let him live, she commanded. "Let him be a lesson to all who would betray me." The soldiers moved in to capture Keldris, dragging him away in chains. Velzer looked at Dane, her expression softening. "Thank you, human." Dane gave her a tired smile. "Just don't make a habit of getting in trouble, Queen." She chuckled, the sound of it almost foreign to her ears. "I will not." As the smoke cleared and the last of the traitors were taken into custody, the battle ended. Velzer stood victorious, her throne still secure. But for the first time, she understood that victory wasn't just about strength or power. It was about honor, and the human warrior beside her had taught her that. The battlefield had fallen silent, save for the distant hum of the wrecked mechs and the soft footsteps of soldiers moving through the dust. The traitors were taken away in chains, their rebellion crushed. The throne room of the Exelveran Empire was secure once again, and yet Queen Velzer felt a strange sense of emptiness. She had defeated Keldris, the would-be usurper, and saved her throne. But now, standing among the wreckage of battle, her eyes fell on Dane Carter, the human who had stood by her side when no one else would. He was no longer just an ally. He had become more than that. His strength, his skill, his ability to never back down. He had earned her respect, something no one else had ever managed. "You're a warrior," she said softly, turning toward him. Dane gave her a small, tired smile. "I'm just a guy who doesn't like losing." She chuckled, though it was quiet, almost thoughtful. "You've proven that you're more than just a survivor." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the defeated traitors being carted away, the hum of the remaining energy sources, were the only things that filled the silence. Dane was about to speak when he noticed a group of Selveran soldiers walking toward them, the Queen's personal guard. They were heavily armed, their eyes not just watching the battle's aftermath, but also studying him carefully. Dane's hand instinctively hovered over his weapon, ready for anything. But Velzer raised a hand, stopping him. "They're not here for you," she said, her voice steady. The soldiers bowed low before her, their respect clear. One of them stepped forward, holding a small ornate box. Velzer took it with a steady hand, her eyes shifting back to Dane. "This is for you," she said. Dane looked at her, confused. "For me? What's this?" With a deliberate motion, she opened the box. Inside, there was a medal, shaped like the Exelveran sigil, glowing faintly with a soft blue light. The soldiers who had come with her were honoring him. "This is a mark of honor," she said. "Only the greatest warriors of the Empire receive this. You have earned it by standing beside me, by proving that a human is just as strong, just as capable as any of us." Dane took the medal, looking at it for a moment. He wasn't sure what to say. No one had ever given him something like this. It was a symbol of respect, something that meant a lot more than just a piece of metal. "I didn't do it for medals," he muttered. "I did it because you needed help." Velzer nodded. "You helped me when no one else would. You fought for honor. And that is something the Exelveran Empire has never forgotten." He looked at her, meeting her eyes for the first time without the walls of war between them. There was a new understanding between them now, something that went beyond their differences. "I guess we make a pretty good team," Dane said with a smile. Velzer raised an eyebrow, then a small smile tugged at her lips. "We do." As the day's light began to fade, the two stood together amidst the fallen empire, knowing that the world had changed, and they had both changed along with it. Together, they had fought against impossible odds, and together they had won. The throne was safe, but more importantly, they had earned something far more valuable: respect. The once darkened skies of the Selveran Empire began to shift into hues of gold and orange, the sun setting on a new chapter. The capital city, still scared from the battle, slowly started to come alive again. Soldiers began to rebuild, people started to rebuild their homes, and the once fractured empire began to heal. At the heart of it all stood Queen Velzer, her posture regal and powerful as she stood on the steps of her palace. The crowd before her was large, filled with citizens, soldiers, and dignitaries from every corner of the empire. There was respect in their eyes, and a new sense of hope. Beside her stood Dane Carter, the human who had once been seen as an outsider, a mere mythical warrior. Now he was something much more, a symbol of unity between the Excelveran and human races, a hero to both. Valzur's voice rang out to the crowd. Today marks a new beginning for the Excelveran Empire. We stand united, not by the power of one, but by the strength of many, different races, different warriors, different worlds. Together, we are unstoppable. The crowd erupted into cheers, the roar of approval almost deafening. Dane stood slightly behind her, his expression more humble than ever. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, but he could feel the weight of their praise. He had earned his place here, beside a queen who had once considered him nothing more than a myth. After the ceremony, the two of them stood quietly, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The silence was comfortable, a far cry from the chaos that had once surrounded them. "Do you think it will last?" Dane asked, his voice low, his eyes still watching the distant skyline. Valzur glanced at him, a faint smile on her lips. "I believe it will," she said, her voice steady. "I have seen the strength of humanity. It is a force like no other." Dane turned to her, raising an eyebrow. "You think so? After all that happened?" "I know so." She nodded, a flicker of respect in her eyes. "You've proven to me that strength isn't just about power. It's about the heart. The courage to stand up when all seems lost." He didn't know what to say. The words felt too heavy, too meaningful. As they stood in the fading light, the quietness between them was more than just peace. It was understanding. The two of them had been different, but their bond had changed the course of history. They had fought together, and now, they stood at the start of something greater. "I guess we did make a good team," Dane said, his tone lighter now, as he finally met her gaze. Valzur smiled, truly smiled for the first time in a long while. "We did, and I think we'll make an even better one going forward." Dane nodded, a new confidence in his step. Whatever came next, he was ready for it. Together, they would face whatever challenges the future held. And in that moment, they both knew that the new era had only just begun.